I'm James Turk. I'm a director of the Gold Money Foundation, and I'm pleased to be here today with noted historian, former member of the European Parliament, and author of 5 books, including this one, When Money Dies: The Nightmare of the Deficit Spending, Devaluation, and Hyperinflation of Weimar Germany. Adam Ferguson, it's a pleasure to be with you here today.
Nice to have you here.
So Adam, in your book, it is clear that the underlying cause of great hyperinflation was that at the time central bankers and government officials didn't connect the dots between money printing and inflation. In the current crisis with the quantitative easings and competitive currency devaluation, do you think central bankers are at risk of making the same mistake?
Central bankers, without exception, all understand monetary theory. The fact that they ignore what they know is, for political or economic or other purposes, is beside the point. They know what causes inflation, they know what causes devaluation and depreciation of the currency. Sometimes it is seen to be politically necessary to do what all common sense tells you should not be done.
Since 2007, the spending of the United States on wars and social programs seems to have broken free of the realities of finance. Do you see the parallels?
I think that's stretching it quite a long way. In Germany in 1914, hoped to win a quick war. They hoped it would be over by Christmas, and that they would be able to pay for it by what they seized from the Allied treasuries when they'd won it. This is not the same kind of condition at all. The wars that the West, America, NATO has been fighting have all been for very different purposes with very different objectives than from what Germany was seeking in those days. And the financing of the war, well, the Germans simply didn't bother to think out how that war should be financed. They didn't think it would arise.
But isn't that a parallel with the present situation? Are governments today really thinking of the consequences of the deficit spending that they're pursuing to finance wars and social programs?
I suppose that's you could certainly argue it, but national defense is often thought to be the most important thing for many people. And whether you think a war here or there across the world is in the national defense is another matter. But national defense is something that from throughout history people have always put right at the top of the national necessities.
When you wrote Money Dies in 1975, the world was in the grip of inflation at double digits or approaching double digits.
Yeah, it was, yes.
Yeah. Do you see a similar occurrence of inflation? Do you see inflation occurring again in the future as a consequence of the policies that are being pursued?
Oh, yes, I do. I see it getting worse and worse. The question is how bad it's going to be. If you're looking again back on Germany, I don't think it's possible to have in an advanced Western economy hyperinflation of the kind that was achieved there mainly through monetary ignorance. But inflation, if you start inflating your economy, you're playing with fire always, and it can get out of hand. And to that extent, the parallel again is certainly there.
Do you sense that inflation is starting to get out of hand, given all of the quantitative easing that central banks around the world are pursuing to finance these seemingly never-ending government deficits?
I think the position is, of course, terribly serious, right through, again, the Western economies. I don't see that any of these economies is going to be able to grow its way out of the extraordinary debts that they have. The logic of that, if you can't grow your way out of your debt, you have to repudiate that debt. And there's only one serious way of repudiating debt, and that's by inflating. It's what a government can do, and possibly what the only thing it can do eventually, if those debts have to be met. You just get rid of them.
You know, going back to the Weimar Republic, hyperinflation in Germany, what I'd like to do is, again, just sort of emphasize what we can learn from history. I'm a firm believer in the dictum of the American philosopher George Santayana that if we ignore history, we're doomed to relive it. And I think the period of the hyperinflation is definitely an area that we want to avoid. But looking back at that Weimar experience, who were the people who benefited from that inflation? Government obviously benefited because they repaid their debts for next to nothing.
Not only government, but if you had a mortgage, your mortgage was paid off because you could pay it off in postage stamps. If you were a speculator, you could borrow cheaply. The Reichsbank was prepared to give almost limitless credit to anybody who wanted to set up a factory or export or anything like that, because there was such fear of unemployment. That's another parallel today in the nation as a whole. When at a time when revolution was, of course, in the air, they couldn't stand the idea of mass unemployment, and so they gave endless credit. And the answer was that anyone who got hold of that credit could export cheaply, using cheap labor at home, because the price of labor was coming down all the time. And so you got profiteering and speculation on a very, very big scale. The effect of that was to bring a lot of foreign exchange into the country, and the people who used that were again the industrialists and profiteers who were building up their empires all the time. The people who were losing, naturally, were the people who depended on shares and bonds and everything else. Anyone who'd saved any money, all that money disappeared. The other people who did well, it's an extraordinary thing how, and you can see it again now, inflation develops its own lobby, supporting lobby. There are people who, as in Germany, people tried to persuade the government to go on inflating, to go on printing money, because they were making so much out of it. Nowadays, the people who benefit are the hedge fund managers, all the people across the world who are making a lot of money out of the wild fluctuations in the value of currencies all across the world. These are people who benefit.
So the creditors benefited, and the savers and people who had financial assets denominated in Reichsmarks, which was the currency at the time, they were the losers.
They were losing all the time. Anybody who had a fixed income, a pensioner, they would lose. The only people who gained, no, that's the wrong word. The people who were able to keep up with inflation for a long time was anybody who had any kind of grip on the public finances. That is to say, if you were in a trade union, you could strike for higher wages. Say a public trade union. If you were in the railways and the post office, that sort of thing, you could strike, and the government would simply print more money. You could keep up. But if you were a pensioner or someone like a professor or an architect or a lawyer who the demand for whose services were not very high when in times of high inflation, your income would simply disappear, and you would, instead of making money out of other people, you would find yourself breaking rocks on the riverside.